Every global economy depends not on markets alone, but on invisible systems moving money between institutions silently. And in Canada, those systems evolved into quiet clearinghouses settling trillions beyond public attention or political drama, turning nation into intermediary where transactions pause briefly before flowing onward across global financial arteries, revealing power hidden not in ownership, but in control of movement. Canada's role as financial middleman emerged gradually through institutional trust rather than aggressive expansion. Built on reputation for neutrality, legal stability, and predictable governance appealing to global capital flows, allowing transactions from competing powers to intersect safely within Canadian systems without triggering suspicion, illustrating strategic advantage of being trusted without appearing dominant. Clearinghouses perform essential yet unglamorous function of validating, netting, and settling financial obligations, ensuring buyers receive assets, sellers receive funds, and systemic risk remains contained within controlled boundaries, making them backbone of modern finance despite remaining largely invisible to everyday economic narratives, revealing infrastructure far more influential than speculative markets themselves. Canada invested early in robust payment infrastructure connecting banks, exchanges, and international networks, prioritizing reliability, redundancy, and legal certainty over speed-driven innovation attracting volatile capital, creating an environment where global institutions felt safe routing transactions through Canadian settlement channels, illustrating philosophy favoring stability over spectacle. Post-war financial architecture positioned Canada between American financial dominance and British institutional legacy, allowing it to serve as intermediary compatible with both systems without provoking geopolitical rivalry, making Canadian institutions ideal neutral ground for multinational settlement, custody, and reconciliation processes, revealing geopolitical utility of quiet alignment rather than overt power projection. The Canadian banking system's concentrated structure reinforced this role by limiting fragmentation, ensuring major institutions could coordinate clearing processes efficiently without competitive instability undermining trust, turning domestic consolidation into advantage, supporting international confidence in transactional continuity, illustrating how oligopolistic stability enabled global integration. Foreign exchange settlement benefited particularly from Canadian positioning, as currency trades involving volatile jurisdictions sought neutral intermediaries minimizing counterparty and political risk, routing obligations through Canadian banks capable of handling multi-currency reconciliation discreetly, revealing Canada as silent lubricant of global currency markets. Trade finance followed similar pattern as letters of credit, guarantees, and documentary collections flowed through Canadian desks, supporting international commerce spanning commodities, manufacturing, and energy without drawing attention to intermediaries, allowing Canada to profit from transactional volume without owning underlying goods or production chains, illustrating power derived from facilitation rather than extraction. Clearing operations expanded beyond banking into securities settlement as Canadian infrastructure supported cross-border investment, processing equity trades, bond issuances, and derivatives requiring trusted post-trade reconciliation mechanisms, making Canada integral to capital market plumbing linking institutional investors worldwide, revealing roles central yet rarely acknowledged in financial storytelling. Legal frameworks governing insolvency, collateral, and netting agreements further strengthened this position, providing certainty during disputes or defaults by enforcing predictable outcomes respected internationally, encouraging counterparties to route exposure through Canadian jurisdiction as risk mitigation strategy, illustrating importance of law as financial infrastructure. Payment systems modernized carefully through incremental upgrades rather than disruptive overhauls, ensuring continuity and minimizing systemic shocks that could undermine confidence in settlement reliability, making Canada a dependable transit zone for transactions intolerant of experimental instability, revealing conservative engineering underpinning global trust. Energy trading amplified Canada's clearing role as commodities required settlement across multiple jurisdictions, with pricing, hedging, and delivery obligations reconciled through Canadian financial institutions managing complexity quietly, allowing oil, gas, and electricity trades to clear without geopolitical entanglement, illustrating neutrality converting into transactional leverage. Mining and metals markets also relied on Canadian intermediaries, as global producers and buyers settled contracts, financing, and hedging through Toronto-linked clearing channels, embedding Canada within supply chains governing materials critical to global industrial systems, revealing intersection of resources and financial plumbing. Derivatives markets deepened reliance as complex instruments required sophisticated clearing safeguards, centralizing counterparty risk management within institutions trusted to withstand volatility and cascading failures, positioning Canada as safe node during periods of market stress or global uncertainty, illustrating how risk management confers quiet authority. Sanctions regimes further elevated Canada's intermediary role as restricted flows sought compliant routing. Using Canadian institutions to ensure transactions adhered to international frameworks without public controversy, making Canada executor of financial governance without overt political messaging, revealing silent enforcement power embedded within clearing operations. Digital payments expanded volume without altering underlying role, as fintech innovation still depended on legacy clearing rails maintained by Canadian institutions, ensuring new technologies flowed through established settlement infrastructure rather than bypassing it, illustrating continuity beneath surface-level innovation. Cryptocurrency markets paradoxically increased importance of traditional clearing, as exchanges required fiat on-ramps, custody services, and compliance layers anchored in trusted jurisdictions, leading many operators to rely on Canadian intermediaries despite decentralization rhetoric, revealing persistence of centralized settlement even within digital finance. Multinational corporations structured treasury operations around Canadian clearing hubs, using them to pool cash, manage liquidity, and net obligations across subsidiaries spanning continents, turning Canada into backstage coordinator of corporate cash flows invisible to consumers, illustrating enterprise reliance on neutral financial orchestration. Global crises repeatedly reinforced this role as panic increased demand for trusted settlement venues, routing transactions through Canadian systems known for operational resilience and regulatory predictability, allowing markets elsewhere to stabilize using Canada as transactional shock absorber, revealing crisis-driven validation of middleman power. Government debt issuance and sovereign transactions also intersected with Canadian clearing infrastructure, as bonds, swaps, and reserve movements relied on settlement systems capable of handling sovereign-scale complexity, embedding Canada within highest tiers of international financial operations discreetly, illustrating sovereign trust placed in invisible mechanisms. Despite this centrality, public discourse rarely acknowledged clearing as source of influence. Because power expressed through facilitation lacks visible symbols of dominance or confrontation, allowing Canada to accumulate leverage without attracting political backlash or nationalist scrutiny, revealing advantage of infrastructural invisibility. Thus, Canada became financial crossroads where money pauses, reconciles, and continues onward, exercising power not by commanding capital, but by ensuring its safe passage across hostile terrain, creating role indispensable yet understated within architecture of global finance. Setting stage for deeper exploration of how this quiet middlemanship shapes sovereignty and future risk. As global finance accelerated, Canada's clearing role deepened from passive intermediary into active stabilizing mechanism, absorbing transactional friction between competing jurisdictions, currencies, and regulatory regimes without public recognition, allowing capital to flow smoothly even as geopolitical tensions fragmented trust elsewhere, revealing clearing as geopolitical service rather than mere technical process. International banks increasingly structured cross-border operations around Canadian settlement nodes, using them to reduce exposure to volatile jurisdictions and unpredictable legal enforcement environments, positioning Canada as neutral buffer where obligations could be reconciled without political escalation, illustrating strategic value of procedural trust. This neutrality allowed Canadian systems to process transactions involving adversarial states indirectly, so long as compliance frameworks were satisfied and exposure risks appropriately netted and contained, making Canada facilitator of continuity even amid fractured global alliances, revealing quiet diplomacy executed through accounting entries. Central counterparties operating within Canada expanded importance by absorbing default risk, standing between buyers and sellers to guarantee settlement during periods of extreme market stress, preventing cascading failures that could destabilize global financial ecosystems rapidly, illustrating how clearinghouses function as shock absorbers for international capitalism. When crises struck global markets, volume routed through Canadian systems surged noticeably, as institutions prioritized reliability over speed, innovation, or speculative advantage, trusting Canadian infrastructure to perform flawlessly under extraordinary transactional pressure, revealing crisis preference for conservative settlement environments. Derivatives exposure amplified this reliance because margin calls, netting cycles, and collateral movements required precision, forcing institutions to rely on jurisdictions with predictable enforcement of contractual obligations, placing Canada at center of invisible crisis management architecture during financial turbulence, illustrating authority earned through consistency rather than dominance. Collateral management further strengthened this position as trillions required secure custody and valuation, with Canadian institutions providing legal certainty around pledges, rehypothecation limits, and liquidation rights, making them indispensable during volatile periods when asset values fluctuated violently, revealing custody as core pillar of financial sovereignty. Foreign sovereign wealth funds utilized Canadian clearing routes to rebalance reserves discreetly, avoiding market signaling that could destabilize currencies or invite speculative attacks, using Canadian systems as camouflage for large-scale strategic financial movements, illustrating power of invisibility within capital management. Energy markets relied heavily on Canadian intermediaries during periods of supply disruption, settling contracts, hedges, and emergency trades under frameworks insulated from sanctions volatility, allowing physical commodities to keep moving despite political confrontation elsewhere, revealing infrastructure enabling continuity amid conflict. Shipping and insurance settlements followed similar paths through Canadian financial plumbing, ensuring maritime trade obligations cleared without entanglement in regional disputes or enforcement uncertainty, positioning Canada as silent guarantor of global logistical continuity, illustrating clearing as backbone of physical commerce. Trade disputes increasingly bypassed public arbitration by restructuring settlement routes instead, allowing counterparties to resolve obligations quietly through trusted financial intermediaries, reducing reputational damage while preserving commercial relationships discreetly, revealing financial plumbing as alternative diplomatic channel. Sanctions compliance elevated Canada's importance further as transactions required precise filtering, with Canadian institutions balancing enforcement with operational continuity for multinational clients, making them executors of financial policy without overt political declarations, illustrating governance through process rather than proclamation. Digital payment expansion did not diminish this role, but amplified dependency on legacy rails, as fintech platforms ultimately reconciled positions through established clearing and settlement systems, ensuring innovation remained anchored to trusted infrastructure beneath user-facing interfaces, revealing illusion of decentralization masking centralized settlement reality. Stablecoin and cryptocurrency operations increasingly intersected with Canadian clearing points, especially where fiat conversion, custody, and regulatory compliance remained unavoidable, forcing decentralized systems to re-enter traditional financial plumbing quietly, illustrating gravitational pull of institutional settlement structures. Corporate treasury departments consolidated global liquidity through Canadian clearing hubs, netting intercompany obligations, managing currency exposure, and optimizing cash positions invisibly, turning Canada into operational brain coordinating multinational financial circulation, revealing corporate dependence on neutral settlement environments. Insurance and reinsurance flows also pass through Canadian systems extensively, settling catastrophe exposure, risk transfer obligations, and capital reserves across jurisdictions, embedding Canada within global risk-sharing mechanisms underwriting modern economic activity, illustrating role beyond banking alone. As geopolitical fragmentation intensified, reliance on neutral clearing jurisdictions increased dramatically, making Canada more valuable precisely because it avoided overt financial nationalism, allowing adversaries to transact indirectly without legitimizing each other publicly, revealing paradox where neutrality becomes strategic dominance. Regulatory credibility proved essential as Canadian authorities emphasized predictability over interventionism, avoiding abrupt rule changes that could disrupt international settlement confidence, ensuring long-term institutional trust even amid shifting political leadership, illustrating governance through restraint. Public awareness remained minimal because clearing power lacks visual drama, operating through spreadsheets, timestamps, and reconciliation cycles invisible to ordinary citizens, masking influence that shapes global stability more than visible market headlines, revealing invisibility as strategic advantage. Attempts to replicate Canada's model elsewhere struggled due to political volatility, fragmented banking systems, or inconsistent legal enforcement undermining transactional trust, reinforcing Canada's entrenched position as reliable intermediary difficult to replace, illustrating path dependence within financial infrastructure. Future technological shifts threaten speed but not necessity of clearing, because trust, enforcement, and netting remain human-designed institutions requiring stable jurisdictions, ensuring Canada's relevance persists despite surface-level financial innovation, revealing durability of foundational systems. As global systems strain under debt, conflict, and fragmentation, middlemen grow more powerful than owners, facilitators more influential than producers, placing Canada quietly at heart of global finance, without symbolic acknowledgement, illustrating power exercised through continuity rather than control. Thus, Canada stands not as financial empire, but indispensable corridor, where money pauses, reconciles, and survives turbulence before continuing onward, holding leverage through trust, stability, and procedural dominance rather than spectacle. So subscribe if uncovering this invisible middleman power helps you understand how global money truly moves.